All right, so yeah, my college database. But if you're interested in college prospecting, which is kind of how I got into doing more content stuff, because I kept listening to podcast after podcast talking about market share, which was the hot stat at the time for who's going to be a good college player. And I don't know if you've ever gone and look. Like, if you want to see a page with a player's market share for a college prospect, that's about findable. But if you want to look at two at the same time, you just have to keep opening up tabs. And if you want to just do a simple percentage calculation yourself, like their receiving yards divided by the team's receiving yards, it's actually pretty hard to get those on the same source. And the minute you start looking at it, you realize, depending on which source you're looking at, they have a different game count, different exact yardage count, and you can get close, but it just frustrated me, and that's actually how I got into making things that I could put out for other people to find, because I thought they might be interested. And so the market share database, as it was at the time, was literally the start of it. It got helped out by a bunch of friends I met on Twitter, including Mark Slavin, who gave me the initial data dump to actually do the calculations, because until a nerd took pity on me, I was hand copying the data from different sources and trying to get them to fit and to work, just to do the percentages. And we've moved on a lot from that. Now we have a positional tab for every position with different stats, with different levels of R squared, which I had to learn because I kept hearing about that on podcasts too, to find out what stats are actually useful and what they're for, which meant I had to learn about probability. I'm not going to pretend that I understand all the statistics. As hopefully, if you've watched one of my videos before, I don't pretend to be the fake nerd. I pretend to be in the dynasty space. Like, I learn as much as I can. So we have a lot of stats. If you're interested in a stat on a prospect from college, it's probably in the database. And if it's not, let me know, because I actually have most of them now. And if it's one you're really interested in, I can usually include it. And the testing has led me to a lot of places to get better at prospect profiling. And we've gotten a lot better at rookie ranks, as well as finding undervalued players in rookie drafts. But that's not what this video is about. I want you to know that you can find all that. That's where I got started, just because it's fun to play with this stuff. And if you enjoy fantasy football, you probably enjoy it a little bit. And it can be hard to get your own version of it that's consistent and has the team and also the player stats. So you can find it pinned to my Twitter timeline. It's literally my pinned tweet most of the time, except for in season when we do the weekly NFL stat database. You can also find it pinned to my Patreon profile. And yeah, it's Patreon, but that one's, you can click on the link. In fact, the Twitter link sends you to the Patreon link, so you can click on it and it takes you to a Google Sheet, which you can then download by going to the file menu and hitting download or save as. I think that's the one. So yeah, you can just have your own version, your own rookie stats to play with. You can start making your own models or timesing one number by another number, see what happens. Let's get crazy, because the main one's always saved and is just their stats, unless, again, I add more stats because someone else is finding something else interesting. There is a section in there, I'll point out, and right now it's called adjusted stats. Used to call them like Pahowdy stats. That's things I'm playing around with. I don't think they're going to correlate to any other number you'll find on any other website, but I like trying to times different numbers together to try and find something that helps out with statistics. And that's what that section is. Everything else is as you'll find it on other websites. That's what the Dominator calculation is, exactly what you'll find on other websites. Some use per game, some don't. It doesn't matter. Breakout age, standard definition used for that. Receiving yards per team pass attempt is one I got in on fairly early. I think JJ Zacharyson from the Late Round podcast was the first person I ever heard talking about it, and I got really into it, and I like to think I made it a little bit more popular. You might have heard of it a bit, and that's all in there too. I'm not going to bore you to death. If it's not in there, then you can, like I say, DM me, comment below, and I'll try and add it. Honestly, you've got combine stats lined up with NFL stats, so you can do a little rudimentary R-squared testing. Also have an R-squared tab that shows just the straight-up correlation between individual stats and the NFL points per game through the first 3 years, because that's the first test I run just to see if anything's got any level of signal. And the formula tab, which is how you calculate these things. How do you calculate Dominator? How do you count? What is this adjusted stat, Pete, you got here? Because I'm slightly interested in it. Well, there's a formula and a description of it, as well as any information I have about where that stat originated from. I try and put that in there too. Anything else in there? Yeah, pretty much a lot. I've removed my own modeling because, again, I don't want to make it here's what it's meant to be. Here are stats. Let's go have fun arguing about prospect ranks. And that's what it is. I do have a source tab in there, which I always want to mention, because again, Sean Slavin, who helped get me from copying and pasting information from individual pages up to an actual data set, as well as a number of other people that continue to help me with it. The dude Z, or Zeno, he actually has an online app that'll plot some of the stats against their age, because that's normally how I rank their yearly stats, by age, because I find it the most significant variable when looking at their stat and deciding whether it's good or bad. Did they do that at 18 or did they do that at 19? It's actually slightly different expectation depending on how old a player is, and we think that going all the way back to the start of breakout age and all that trends from Sean Slavin. One of the best explanations for that is one, trust from the coach and team. Sure, that probably plays a part too. If they're trusting you younger, that probably means they think more of you, so you're borrowing a lot of that tape evaluation. But also physical development happens at a relatively steady rate. If you're an 18-year-old playing against mostly 23, 24-year-olds and carrying your own weight, that probably says something about your skill, since you're less physically developed than you're going to be moving forward. We don't really have the exact science behind it, and I don't care, because again, not a scientist, but I do know that it's helpful. Alright, so yeah, go find the statistics, time things against other things, and see what pops out, and if you find anything interesting. It's got combine stats, NFL stats, and college stats. This off-season, actually for the last few weeks of the NFL season, I painstakingly added PFF IDs to my current ID system, which means we also have yards per route run, elusive rating, QB rating, various other well-quoted and used on other podcasts statistics for rookie profiling, and targets. I've been doing this for about 5 years, and targets were not a thing that were recorded in public data, and it was remarkably difficult to try and piece them out of the play-by-play data using Excel, which I did try for a little while. But PFF gives us access to targets too, so we got target share, not just receiving yard share and receiving yard touchdown share and rushing share. We actually have target share now, which is pretty cool, I think. And like I said, elusive rating, QB accuracy, everything I could grab that I think would be interesting. Yards after contact per attempt is a really good running back stat, which brings me to what I think might actually be a valuable point from this video, saving it for the end, like a true YouTuber. Again, not an actual scientist, not a mathematician or a statistician, but I've been remarkably disappointed with yards per route run when it goes to wide receiver profiling. Now, it's not that I'm not saying it's not useful or not good or not great, actually. It's a really good stat. It's really interesting. So is the targets per route run I've calculated using the PFF data. So is yards per routes per team pass attempt. These are stats where we were learning about them this season in the NFL, so I transferred them to college. Now I have that data for college. Here's the thing. While it's useful, in order to get better modeling results, as in times this number by that number, and you get a ranking of players going into their rookie season and who's more or less likely to be good. That's what I mean by modeling anyway. Usually just a simple multilinear regression model. That's how I've mostly done modeling, and the one I'm most familiar with, just in case you're a nerd who knows some of those words. Receiving yards by team pass attempt, that stat I made up, or JJ Zacharyson first mentioned and I got really into, it was kind of a, let's find something that does something, because we don't have targets, we don't have routes, we don't have snap data, and that might actually give us help. And it did. It kicks yards per route run's ass. Hands down, straight up testing, players drafted into the NFL, their yards per route run correlation to points per game through the first 3 years is 0.04, which actually isn't terrible for NFL stats. It kicks the crap out of anything you're going to get from the combine. But receiving yards per team pass attempt, straight up, same sample, all players drafted in that same period, because we only have PFF stats from 2014, 0.11. Again, that's actually terrible for regular correlation testing, but it's a lot better than yards per route run. And I've played with it, I can't make it beat or even equal receiving yards per team pass attempt, and it doesn't help it out much either. There's a thing in and again, I barely understand most of this, but there's a thing called multi-collinear. I can't say the word, but basically it means you're double, triple counting. You're taking signal from one thing and adding it to something that also carries that signal and receiving. And when you start using yards per route run with some of the stats I've previously found successful, you run into multi-collinearity. I can't say the dang word. Look at it. I'll write it in the description. Very well. You can create an overfit model, which is asking it to tell you what happened, not asking it to tell you what's more likely to happen, is a rough way of thinking about it. And it's not that it's not good. It actually is a really good look at what a player did. But in terms of what a player's going to do, receiving yards per team pass attempt and adjusted yards per team attempt for running back is actually better. But it does give us a much more in-depth view of what they were doing in college. And I'm just an amateur, so maybe you can find something better. Or maybe yards per route run is just a more comfortable stat because you're used to hearing about it from the NFL player, so you have a good understanding of how it works, or you just want to use the same stat for both levels of play. Fine. But elusive rating yards after catch per attempt is really interesting. QB rating and QB accuracy, both really interesting stats. We might improve at running back and quarterback more than we improve at wide receiver or tight end. But I'll be really interested to see what you can find out, because that's where I'm at. I think the stats I'm going to rely on the most are the ones we had before we had routes data. It'd be rookie. We're getting to it. I know a lot of impatience. Let's get to the rookies, but you're going to be bored of them by the time we get to the draft, and your draft, I promise. We are getting to it. I actually have my first few profiles to write up for DLF due in 4 or 5 days, so I better start hammering in on it. I've played with the stats enough. Again, there's another clip. Appreciate it. Thanks very much. See you in the next one.